most of you already heard at dinner a little bit of my background of how I got into the Theosophical Society. For Shay and Barbara, I'll just mention that I discovered Theosophy about 38 years ago, and knew immediately that this was something special, that it struck a resonant string within me, and I knew immediately that this was my life work. And so I have studied it and devoted as much time as possible to it, while still having to have a career and a job. Recently retired, and now we'll have a little more time, hopefully, to devote to Theosophy. Paul discovered Theosophy about 4 years ago. We're not sure when. Actually, it was many lifetimes ago. What are we talking about? It was many lifetimes ago. So he has a cousin who's closer to my age, who introduced him, said, oh, you know, if you're interested in kind of metaphysical stuff, you should go to this guy's class once in a while. And he kept asking about it, and he asked enough times that she said, okay, come with me the next time. And he came to the class, and we would have people who come in, you know, once or twice and then leave. And so I didn't pay too much attention, but he kept coming back, and I'm like, oh, well, he must be serious. And then one day he said, can I make an appointment, like come over and talk to you about some things? I'm like, sure. So we were talking about all kinds of things about life, and then he said, I want to do what you do. And I said, what do you mean? He says, I want to teach. I said, oh, okay. So, and that was only 4 years ago. So he's been studying a lot. And he was the one who introduced me to the teachings of Eckhart Tolle. I have, you know, looked at other guru teachers, you know, Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, some of the others. Although they resound with a lot of people and create a lot of good information and experience for some people, I never found much of interest in them. To me, Theosophy was just about the only thing that seemed to have a whole lot of depth to it. But then he gave me a copy of Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, so I had to read it. It was a gift. So I read it, and I'm like, holy Toledo. This guy actually knows what he's talking about. And he doesn't just talk about it, he actually practices it. That makes a whole difference to me when somebody actually practices what they're talking about. He's relaying experience, not just something that he has gleaned from reading a whole bunch of books. And the more I read about it, the more I read his book, the more I liked it. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is this is Theosophy put into practice, using modern psychological understanding of human nature and how to get rid of the ego and the importance of getting rid of the ego. He's the first person I can remember who actually said, you need to get rid of it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the Theosophy in practice. I said, if we can take his teachings and Theosophy, we can have the perfect product here. So Paul and I, 3 years ago, decided to teach a class, a study course on his book, A New Earth, and but to bring theosophical principles into it. And it was very popular. We had people of all age groups coming to our class. It lasted for 11 months or so, and they loved it, absolutely loved it. So since then, we have worked on other classes together. He taught a class strictly on Theosophy, based on John Algio's book, the study, what is it called? Introductory study course. And we've done that course a number of times. But when we bring the two in together, we find that people have a lot more interest than when it's just dry theory. Theosophy has lots of theory and lots of information. It is incredible the amount of information that we have because of the Theosophical Society. But to me, and that's just my opinion, what we are lacking is the practical approach to things. Vic Hao Chin right now is teaching a workshop at Crotona on practical application of theosophy in a very specific way. It's called, what is it called, self-transformation? No. The process of self-transformation. And he works specifically with emotions, with emotional triggers that are caused either by specific individuals, persons in your life, or a specific incident. And he goes through a process where he has people recall a person or an incident that has created some kind of an unresolved emotional conflict. And he has them work through that until it is released. And you may have to do it several times. But this, again, is a very practical approach using theosophical principles, and he's had great success with this. Has taught this course in many different countries, and I guess a couple of times in the U.S. So this is the sort of thing that we love. Taking all this knowledge, all of this information that has been gleaned for well, 130 some years now by the TS, but is really all what we call ancient wisdom. It is ancient wisdom. There's nothing new under the sun. Every teacher, every true true spiritual teacher teaches exactly the same message. And maybe the Buddha said it the most succinctly, and that is, there is suffering in the world. Yes, we recognize that. There is a way to overcome suffering, and I can tell you how to do that. This is how you do it. Here are the steps. So any real spiritual training will teach you how to overcome suffering. So the title of the discussion tonight, and by the way, if you have questions that are pertinent to what is being discussed, please raise them at any time. At the end of the talk, we will have just kind of a more open, general discussion, and we can discuss other things that might be of interest. But if you have a question or comment on something that is being discussed immediately, please don't hesitate. So we're talking about self-transformation and the science of yoga. And specifically, when I say the science of yoga, I'm referring to a book, the book by I.K. Taimni, called The Science of Yoga. How many of you have read that book?
I've looked at it.
You've looked at it?
Looked at it.
Okay.
It's a tough one, Taimni.
Okay. After anyone raised their hand, I was going to ask how many found it easy to read. It's not an easy book to read. It's quite daunting, in fact. But it's an incredible book. I.K. Taimni is a wonderful, wonderful author. I can't remember when he died, I believe in the 1960s. But he was trained in the sciences. He was a professor of chemistry at the University of Allahabad in India. And he was also a theosophist. I believe he was born into a theosophical family. But he studied and learned Sanskrit. He studied Vedanta. He knows theosophy inside, or knew it inside and out. And he combined a lot of his scientific training with understanding of theosophy. In fact, one of his books he wrote several books, and they're all very good, but very difficult to read. One of them that's really good is called Science and Occultism. And he uses Einstein's theory of relativity and many other scientific theories and ways of looking at the universe, and explains, for the most part, that occultism knew these things long ago. And actually knows a lot more than science does. Science is actually approaching occultism in its way of looking at life. And that's great. HPV predicted that that's what would happen. And it's exactly what's happening. So self-transformation, what does that imply? There's two different ways of looking at it. You can say self-transformation or self-realization with a capital S. And it's the same thing, simply looking at it from two different aspects. If you're talking about self-transformation, which is the term I prefer, it means that you are taking this personality, what we normally think of as myself, the average person thinks of myself, and we're transforming it into something else, hopefully something better, something more exalted, something more of a spiritual nature. Self-realization is focusing at a higher level, that of the higher self, the soul. I tend to use the word soul quite a bit, and let me just explain. I know in a lot of the older theosophical literature, they used the word ego or ego as they at one point decided. And Theosophists have struggled with this term for years. It's kind of an unfortunate choice of terms, and the reason for that is because they chose it before Freud decided to use it in a very different way. So they chose to use the word ego to mean the higher nature. Our causal body, that part of our being as an individual which exists on the higher mental plane, and specifically the three subplanes of the mental plane. So that would be the higher mental plane. So they used this word self or ego for a number of years, and then modern psychology started using it in a different way. And so then they decided to pronounce it differently. Well, let's pronounce it ego instead of ego. But then Kellogg's came along with the breakfast product, obviously. But it's too confusing, I think. So I prefer to use the word ego simply to mean the personality instead. And whenever I mention the higher self or the soul, that would be your higher nature. So Paul and I, after we taught this class, decided to write a book based on it. So we wrote a book called, what is it called?
What is it called?
Ancient Wisdom for a New Age, a practical guide for spiritual growth. And it is exactly that. It's a combination of Theosophy and Eckhart Tolle's teachings. But I actually discovered something a little bit strange. I'm talking about The Science of Yoga, the book by Taimni. I had tried to read it a number of years ago, and I think I got through a couple of chapters, and I gave up. I just couldn't get through it. And then after we wrote this book, and the writing of the book was unusual because we would discuss, I did most of the writing, but we would discuss it, get together quite often and discuss it and figure out what we're going to do and in what order we're going to do things. And in a sense, the book almost wrote itself. Some days I would sit down to write and there would be nothing. And I just couldn't write that day. But other times, you have to be like in a meditative state for it to happen. And then it's almost like it just flowed, just information. I could hardly write it down fast enough. And I could do that for an hour and a half, and then the concentration required is quite a bit, and then I would get tired and just have to stop. But then we had all of these different kind of elements, and we just had to kind of fit them together and figure out in what order we were going to present it, and it all just sort of fell together. It's like, whoa. So after the book was written, in fact, just a few months ago, I went back to The Science of Yoga by Tiny, started reading it, and I'm like, this is exactly what we put in the book. And one thing after another, I'm like, this is crazy. It's almost like we took different elements from his book and then put it in this one. And it wasn't, it's just that they happen to match up. And the more I read it, the more I realized that it's exactly what's in this book on Raja Yoga, the aphorisms of Patanjali. So that's what the book Science of Yoga is. It's one more commentary on the aphorisms of Patanjali. Have any of you read any of the commentaries on?
Yeah, Kathy gave a presentation.
Oh, you did? Okay, good. There are a number of very good commentaries on this book. And no one knows when it was written. It's hundreds and probably over 1,000 years ago at least, but it could be 2,000 years. No one knows. No one knows. And it's obviously whoever Patanjali was wrote down information that had been transmitted and developed among a number of teachers, I'm sure. I'm sure he didn't just come up with it on his own, whoever this teacher was. But it was the first that we had that was a concise exposition of this. And it is very scientific. I'm glad that Timon chose that title. It is a scientific method of doing something. We're going to discuss what that doing something is. So there are a number of very good commentaries. In Taimni's case, he kind of follows a tradition in India, which is to present the Sanskrit, and they're in verses. There's 4 chapters in the book, and in each chapter there are between 50 and 60 verses. And they're very short, they're very concise. That's why they're called sutras. Sutra means a string, or something that you can put other things on. So it's like a string of these little gems of information, but it is very succinct and very concise. So the tradition is in India to do the Sanskrit version in the Devanagari script, then kind of a literal translation of it, which to most people still doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and then a commentary that would explain in a little more modern language what it is that they were transmitting however many 100 years ago that this was written down. So his, although it is hard to read, is, I think, one of the best. Isn't necessarily the best. There are others that are very good. And there are others that don't present it in such a way. They will present it more as just the commentary. And then there are some, like Alice Bailey, for example. How many of you have read the, let's see, what is it called? The Light of the Soul. Anyone read that? Any Alice Bailey fans here? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's the first time he ever admitted it. You're not being politically correct, Terry. You know what I mean? You know, come on, as a sensitive Mormon, you should be politically correct. Alice Bailey?
We forgot to ask if it's okay to videotape. Right. Anybody have?
You better.
Does anybody here have an agent that objects to their use of their image or copyright?
Oh, sure, now that you've admitted it.
Yeah, it's on tape. See, now he's going to blackmail you. Now this is how he's going to get his money.
Anyway, Alice Bailey, some of the books she read, she claims, and I don't know whether it's true or not, she claims were dictated to her by the master D.K. And then there were a few books that she wrote entirely on her own, but she says this one was a combined effort. Supposedly, the story is that D.K. did the Sanskrit translation of each of the little chapters or each of the little paragraphs, and then she did the commentary. So it seems to be one that's easier to read. If Taimni scares you and it's just too daunting, this is one that's much easier to read. There are several others too, but that's a good one. That's one I can recommend. All right, so what is yoga? What is yoga, and what is the science of yoga that Taimni is talking about? Everything that we call yoga, and in the West, unfortunately, Paul, by the way, is a great Hatha yoga fanatic. He actually did a yoga competition recently. Whoever heard of a yoga competition? But no, he is very devoted to Hatha yoga and specifically to Bikram yoga. Any of you know that?
Have they done Bikram yoga before?
Any of you done it? It's done in 105-degree heat and with very high humidity. And it's 90 minutes of yoga postures and very, very specific. He loves it. I won't even try it. Anyway, every form of yoga that we talk about came from these Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. But they're very specific. They don't mention Hatha yoga. They do mention Kundalini as part of it, but they don't mention Bhakti yoga. They don't mention, what are some of the others? Laya yoga. Well, Laya and Kundalini are two variations of the same type. But all of these different schools of yoga came about after these aphorisms were written. In fact, Hatha yoga is only a few hundred years old. I think it was developed in 1200 or 1300, something like that, fairly recently. And yet, when in the West, when you say yoga, they think of somebody doing these postures. But the true yoga is much more than that, much more than that. Raja yoga is the term for what Patanjali was teaching, and it has a very specific goal. That goal is, well, let's read it right from the horse's mouth. At the very beginning, it says yoga is the inhibition of the modifications of the mind. Well, that doesn't. But the inhibition of the modifications of the mind. What does that mean? Actually, one of Eckhart Tolle's greatest terms, I love it, is the voice in the head. How many of you have heard his voice in the head? How many of you have a voice in the head? Not everybody does. Everybody does. All throughout the day, isn't there like a constant conversation going on in your mind? Well, I don't know. What do you think? Well, I don't know. What do you think? It's almost like two different people having a conversation, isn't it? It goes on constantly. And what happens when you sit down to meditate? The voice doesn't stop talking. It keeps chattering. This is what he is referring to when he calls the modifications of the mind. The mind kind of just is constantly creating this chatter, what we can refer to as chatter. It may not be words, it may be images, it can be anything. But it's whatever is passing through. Sometimes it's, and as you become more sensitive, you can be aware of this. Sometimes it is nothing more than the thought forms that other people around you are sending out. You may be picking up on a thought form and all of a sudden a phrase will pop into your head. Have any of you have this happen to you? You're in a car driving somewhere. All of a sudden a song comes into your mind. You turn the radio on and it's playing. Has anyone done that? Sure. Yeah, exactly. Well, the same thing happens with people's thoughts. You'll be driving down the road or sitting in your house or apartment. All of a sudden a thought pops into your head. Well, it may very well be your neighbor that is thinking that thought. They just sent it out. It may have nothing to do with you. It just happened to be passing in the neighborhood. We pick up on these vibrations all the time without realizing. And sometimes your mind will capture that and will start manipulating it and do something else with it. So yoga is gaining control. It's inhibiting this natural function of the mind, which is to do something. The mind loves to be busy and to do things, to create things, and to manipulate and change things. But it hates to be quiet. Most people, that voice in the head doesn't stop until when? Until you're so tired that you fall asleep. That's when it stops. And even then, your dreams kind of reflect what happened before that. Whatever TV show you happen to be watching, whatever conversations or whatever happened during the day, quite often will show up in your dreams in a very weird, strange manner. Do they not? Yeah, exactly. So inhibiting all of that is what yoga is about. Let's find another way of saying that is the basic idea underlying the whole philosophy of yoga is the destruction of the I consciousness, capital I consciousness. The destruction of the I consciousness. I'm going to read a little quote from The Light of the Soul. On page 211, she says, "The goal of meditation is the ability to contact the divine inner self, and through this contact to come to a realization of the unity of that self, and your higher inner divine self, with all selves and the all self, capital A, capital S. And not just theoretically, but as a fact. In other words, you're experiencing it. That's something you now know. It's not just something you read, but you experienced it. This comes about when a state called samadhi is achieved, wherein the consciousness of the thinker is transferred out of the lower brain consciousness into that of the spiritual man or soul on its own plane. And then she talks about the different stages of how this occurs. So this is a concise expose of how meditation works. The first step is to concentrate the consciousness in the physical body at a specific point in the brain. So that point is in the neighborhood of the pineal gland. So your consciousness is not just out here somewhere, but is concentrated specifically. And where's the pineal gland?
If you draw a line back from the ajna center and from the very top of the head, slightly in front of the crown chakra, and where those 2 points would meet,
Is approximately
generally where the pineal
approximately where the pineal gland is. So it's deep inside the brain. It's very well protected. So that's where your consciousness is focused. And then the second step is transferring that consciousness out of the physical brain into the lower mind. So what we think of as the mind. This, of course, brings up the point that what we know as Theosophists is that the mind and the brain are two very different things. Scientists haven't figured that out yet. Amazingly, they haven't. Not that I'm aware of. They think that once you die, that's it. So the mind, obviously, is separate, and the mind has to function through the brain when you're operating at a physical level, and it sometimes works pretty well and sometimes not. A person who has neurological problems sometimes is unable to transmit that information or that signal to the physical brain. And so they may be perfectly normal in their mind, but they're not able to talk maybe or express themselves. And that is usually karmic. That's a karmic result of something in most cases. But the mind and the brain are two very different things. And the mind cannot express everything that it can comprehend through the brain. Your brain has to not just grow physically, but it has to increase in sensitivity before, and as it increases in sensitivity, it is able to transmit more of what the mind can conceive. So, from the specific point in the brain to the mind, what we normally think of as our concrete mind or the lower mind, and then finally, actually she makes a point here that this withdrawal of consciousness is undertaken via the etheric body using the Brahmarandra. It is an etheric opening at the top of the head. It's a little bit back, not quite to the crown chakra, but right in about in this area, the Brahmarandra, and that is where the consciousness can reach the mind. And then from there, it can travel further and connect with the higher mind or the soul. So it's a transfer of consciousness. Meditation is a transfer of consciousness from physical, lower mental, to the level of the soul, the higher mind. And then she says, there is then brought about a condition in which the brain, the mental body, and the egoic body, meaning the higher self, form a coherent, quiescent unit, alive, alert, positive, and steady. And it's very important to keep that in mind. Meditation is not this kind of woo-woo thing where you just kind of zone out. It's very active. And if you're doing real meditation, it's not, when you're done, it's not that you have more energy, you're exhausted, because it is an effort. And so it is alive, it's alert, there's kind of an expectation feeling when you really get into true meditation. And we're going to talk about the stages of meditation soon. And it is steady. It has to be absolutely steady. There can't be interruptions, there can't be any distraction whatsoever. When we talk about alignment, people get a little confused because they talk about sometimes aligning your chakras, they talk about, bring all your bodies into alignment. Well, this is really what it is, but it's far more difficult than what most people might think.
Terry, I got a question on.
Yes.
I'm always surprised, great meditation masters, which is contrary to most of the way we look at it. They don't want you to close your eyes. I try it, but I've never been able to quite do it. But I know forget the Tibetan master, which one, he cut his eyelids off in order to, get over this problem. But, I always found it fascinating that they felt that, that more distraction would take place by having closed eyes rather than, the technique of your eyes are barely open yet you're supposed to. So I'm just curious if you had any comments on that.
I've never tried it with my eyes open, and actually never really thought about it that way.
Okay.
Maybe I will try it.
Yeah.
To me, it's one of the main things about meditation is to shut out all of the lower vibrations, and to me it's just easier to close my eyes. But I'll start thinking about that.
Yeah.
I like to explore different ideas, but I have to contemplate it. We're going to talk about contemplation later. So, yoga is the inhibition of the modifications of the mind, and it is what permits us to contact the higher self. The actual channel, you might say, is called the antakarana, another Sanskrit word, all these Sanskrit words. And to me, it's not so important whether you learn the Sanskrit words or not, unless it happens to be fairly easy for you. The main thing is to understand the general concept. Too many people get caught up in terms and think that if you can repeat information that you heard, that you understand it. No. until you experience it, all you're doing is repeating what someone else said. So only when you actually have experience do you really know something. Let's see, there was another quote here that I wanted to bring up. He says, the science of yoga, this is very important because I don't think many people understand this. The science of yoga, which is learning to really meditate, cannot be mastered in one lifetime, but only in a succession of strenuous lives devoted exclusively to the yogic ideal. Those who are impatient and cannot adopt this long-term view are not yet qualified to enter the path and make steady progress towards their goal. This is a long-term commitment. You don't learn to meditate in 6 easy lessons. According to Taimi, and I can verify it, it takes a number of lifetimes. Now, the good news is that some of you have already put in some of that effort in other lifetimes. Probably no one here is experiencing this for the very first time. But it also may take still 2 or 3 or 4 more lifetimes before you fully are able to do it. Kind of daunting, isn't it? No? Well,
I've got time.
yeah, exactly. We have nothing but time, do we? And the truth is, this is what life is all about. That's actually a very good point. We've got nothing but time. And there's nothing else that is more important than that. We think watching a certain show on TV might be more important, or watching the college football game or something might be more important, but truly learning how to raise your consciousness to that of your higher self, I would say that's pretty important. What is our goal as human beings? Anybody have an idea of what is our goal?
To be fully human.
To be totally human.
Yeah.
And what is that? But what is that in?
We don't know what that means yet.
Oh, okay. You're still working on it.
We are still.
Oh, we
working.
are. Okay.
We are still working on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, remember T.R. Desjardins said, a saber-toothed tiger has a saber tooth because he has the soul of a saber-toothed tiger. So, I mean, that's the process we're in. We have the soul of a human, which is pushing out. And we're in this task, like we said, to give it enough time. We don't know what that is yet. We don't, we have the teachings, but the realization of, what that is that keeps pushing us. I mean, the fact that you come here, the fact that you even have these teachings to give us, where does that come from? And I think that's what's pulled in us, this drive to be fully human, that, we couldn't sit here and describe it. We had no concept. It's just like your story. I think it's a wonderful at dinner and all that. That's why we do this. You said you didn't know and you didn't understand, but something was driving you your whole life towards an elusive goal. And I think that's where we're at. You know what I mean?
The drive is desire, and we're going to talk about desire. But it's important to realize later we're going to find out that we have to kill out desire. But there's one very important thing to realize first before we kill it out. And that is, you can't kill it out, number one. Everything has desire. Everything that is alive, and that includes an atom. An atom has desire. An ant has desire. A begonia has desire. A gazelle has desire. A solar logos has desire. All Every living entity has desire at some level. Otherwise, they would do nothing. They would not persist in whatever experience they are trying to gain at their own level. We're expanding our consciousness constantly. Whether you're an ant or whether you're a human or whether you're a plant, it doesn't matter. You are trying to figure out how life works. And by figuring out at your own level of consciousness, little by little, you're growing in consciousness, you're expanding the borders, and you're bursting the confines and constantly expanding that consciousness. Where does it end? It never ends. It never ends. There's no such thing as final enlightenment. It just keeps going on and on. So, desire is what impels us. But I have a way that I would like you to think about what is our purpose as humans. When this consciousness that we all have was operating in an animal, for example, at some point it reached a stage where the animal kingdom could no longer contain it. It needed a different form of expression in order to continue growing. So what happened? It came into human existence. We gained a human soul, and we gained a human mind. We, at first, very primitive, and it has expanded ever since until we are at whatever human level of consciousness each one of us has attained. And as a human race, we kind of have attained an average human consciousness. But at some point, that is no longer able to confine it either. So what is our goal as humans? I say it's to graduate from the human kingdom, to have expanded your consciousness so far that it no longer serves. And what happens at that point? What happens is we are liberated from the cycle of birth and rebirth. That's the end of your obligation. It's also the end of your personal karma. And when you eliminate that, when your consciousness has gained enough life experience, that the human kingdom is no longer enough for you, then you move on to the next. What is next after the human kingdom? Science and religion can't really tell you. But Theosophy can at least give you some clues. We don't. Leadbeater gives us a few ideas of what happens when you graduate from the human kingdom. He says there are 7 different paths that open up. I don't know if that's true or not, but it kind of makes sense. 2 of the paths, for example, are to enter into the angelic kingdom, the kingdom of the devas, to transfer evolution. And some of the others are to aid in other forms of expansion of consciousness in other planetary realms within our system, within our solar system. But one is to come back, sometimes with the physical body, sometimes not, but still coming back and helping the rest of humanity, and that's what we call the masters or the adepts. These are people who have taken a tremendous, it's a tremendous sacrifice that they make to come back sometimes into a physical incarnation. Imagine someone who has gained the right to escape from this, and yet they come back to help. This is big. We didn't know this before Madame Blavatsky came along and introduced us to this idea of people, individuals who have transcended human consciousness. So even though they're still using a physical body, some of them, they're not humans. We need to keep that in mind. They're also not gods. They'll tell you in the Mahatma letters, we're not gods. We aspire to be gods, is what they say. But they are perfected human beings.
Perfected human beings, yes. Masters and adepts, what's the difference with them and Bodhisattva then?
Oh, bodhisattva is a higher level of consciousness. The bodhisattva is just below the Buddha. The bodhisattva is on the verge of becoming a Buddha. And Buddhahood is a level of consciousness in itself.
Okay. So all the masters and adepts are here to help humanity, is that what you're saying?
Humanity and all life.
All
Not just humanity, but the Deva kingdom, plant kingdom, the animal kingdom. They look out for everything, not just humans.
Okay. So a master and adept would be on its way to being a bodhisattva, perhaps?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
But not there yet.
Not there yet. Yeah, I think once you get to be a bodhisattva, maybe you can call yourself a god. I don't know. God is very subjective as to what you consider a god and what is not yet God. We are all gods in becoming, aren't we? I mean, at some point, our consciousness will be, way in the future, at the same level as our solar logos now. It may or may not be a solar logos, but it will have achieved that same level of consciousness, far beyond anything we can conceive of. But it will be there. We are on our way. And the more effort you make, the faster you get there. And science of yoga is what teaches you how to achieve that in a shorter period of time. Why is it so important that we achieve it? Why not just kind of go along with the rest of humanity? You know, all of humanity will achieve. All of humanity will achieve, some faster than others, but imagine our life experience as the human kingdom like a river. It has a certain flow. You might go 2 miles an hour or 15 miles an hour, I don't know how fast a river flows. And humanity is just kind of being dragged along by this current. Well, the person who wants to, some people actually kind of swim against the current, and they'll go sideways, and then they wonder why they get battered. And then there are some people who say, you know what, I see which direction I'm headed, and I kind of see the goal up here, so why don't I swim faster and get there sooner? And so it takes this strenuous effort. Yes, you're going with the flow of the evolution of humans, but if you're going to get there faster, you're going to have to put forth an effort to do that. The rest of humanity will just float with the current, and they'll get there. But there's a dire need right now, a dire need of leaders in the human kingdom, and we don't have them right now. How many masters or adepts are there? I don't know. It's probably a few dozen. There's a person in England who claims to know the exact figure, and I think, 68 or something like that. I don't. It's probably not far off, but it's probably only a few dozen. And in fact, in the Mahatma letters, K.H. said at one point to A.P. Sinnott and A.O. Hume, right now our numbers are dwindling, meaning the number of adepts. Some of them were going off into other endeavors. And he said, right now our numbers are dwindling, hinting that we need some recruits, we need some replacements. So, as Theosophists, what should be our goal? Really should be to become an adept, shouldn't we? Are we just wanting to kind of be students of occultism? Or if we really want to be servants and serve humanity, we've got to move faster and acquire some ability to help people.
Well, you think Blavatsky voices silence. I mean, her last work is, you know, I mean, she's pretty much demanded that of, you know, it's for the few.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's got other writings, but I mean, at the end of her life, she pretty much, you know, put.
And it's near the end of the book where it says, now, Bend thy head and listen well, O Bodhisattva. Compassion speaks and saith, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? So the ones who choose the second portal come back. They make the ultimate sacrifice. They come back to help humanity. And what John was referring to, and thank you, what John was referring to, I think, was something that HPB wrote near the very end of her life. In fact, after she died in 1891, he's going to get some water.
Oh, yeah, no, the doors are tricky.
After she died, they found in her writing desk something that she had written down that, as far as we know, she never used in any publication, or she may have shared it with a few students. No one knows. But it's absolutely wonderful. And this is what she wrote. There is a road, steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that opens inward only and closes fast behind the neophyte forevermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, there is reward past all telling, the power to bless and save humanity. And for those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come. Now, that does sound like a strenuous effort, doesn't it? Okay. That's quite a call to arms, so to speak. It's a call to the faithful. Okay, if you're serious, you're going to have to show it by doing some serious work. And that serious work is called self-transformation. You've got to transform yourself completely if you're going to be one of these saviors of mankind. And you save mankind by setting the example, by achieving it yourself, and then showing other people, giving them some hints and suggestions as to how they can do the same thing. There's only one person you can save. The flight attendants on an airplane are extremely insightful. Did you ever know that? Every time you get on a plane, they give you a spiritual lesson. What do? If those masks fall down, put your own mask on first before you try to help anyone else. Save yourself first before you try to save someone else. But what do? My life's a mess, so what am I going to do? I'm going to fix your life. I'm going to try to fix your life. Yeah, you want to fix everyone's life. You want to save them. Save yourself first. Then you've really got something to share. Then you really can save someone. Until then, you're just fussing with someone else and creating more drama than getting rid of any drama. Save yourself first. So what were the three qualifications that she mentioned? Dauntless courage. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. So courage, dauntless courage, spotless purity. Not just purity, but spotless purity. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. Strong intellect. Who ever heard of strong intellect as being a qualification for achievement in spiritual community? Well, I think she knew what she was talking about. I think she's speaking from her own experience. And those are the people I listen to. HPB was one of the most intelligent people I've ever come across. And she will tell you that she didn't learn all of this stuff by reading books. And in fact, she didn't always understand what she was writing because a lot of it was given to her and was shown to her. She describes in some of her writings how ISIS and the Secret Doctrine, well, even in the Secret Doctrine, it says it's a triple effort by Moria, KH, and HPB. They all three contributed to this book. But it required her intellect and her ability to actually synthesize it and get it into words and on paper. So that requires tremendous intellect. She didn't have a college degree. She wouldn't get anywhere in these days. She wouldn't even be invited to speak at a university. Alice Bailey, here's a story for you. Twice was invited to speak at different universities, and when they found out she didn't have a university degree, they disinvited her. This is how, our academic community is. They go by credentials, and it's understandable. If you don't have any other criteria, then you have to use what you're able to work with. But hopefully the person who is insightful can determine whether or not someone else has something of value. So, dauntless courage, spotless purity, and strong intellect are the three things that she mentions as being the prerequisites before you can even get to this gate that closes behind you forevermore. Wow. Sounds like you're entering prison, you hear that gate slam shut, and you know that that's the end of your former life. Well, that's pretty much a pretty good example of what it is. That's how devoted you have to be if you're really going to do this. Now, please understand that not everyone is ready for that. Some of you are ready to at least start doing some of the serious groundwork in this lifetime. But you will not get there if you don't set the goal. Always keep clearly in mind what that goal is. If your goal is to become an adept, maybe you'll make it in this lifetime, I don't know. But you will never get there if you don't have the goal and if you don't have it clearly in mind. And then start working towards it. Everything that you do should be with that in mind. Life is going to take you different directions. You've got karma that you've got to work with. And you don't have a choice with that. So many New Age metaphysical people learn some of these ideas, and what do they want to do? Oh, that sounds so fun. I want to get away from this life. It's crazy. It drives me crazy. I hate my life. So what do? They immerse themselves in the spiritual community. Oh, look, all this channeling, all this stuff that's going on. This is so exciting. And they forget to do the dishes. They don't take care of their children. They don't care of their responsibilities. They basically just escape from their karma and think that they can make progress. It doesn't work that way. You're going to have to kind of find the middle path, and you've got to live in the world, take care of your everyday obligations if that's what life is carved out for you. And then you've also got to also work on the spiritual side. And then at some point, hopefully, you'll get to devote even more time and effort on it. But when that time comes, if you haven't laid the groundwork, then you're not even ready for it. And by that time in your life, it may be too late to really achieve much at this point. So that's got to be foremost in your mind, or at least at the back of your mind at all times. The yogic technique has to be adopted as a whole and not piecemeal. If, for example, the ordinary desires have not been eliminated and are merely curbed, it is impossible to practice samadhi. These desires will continue to exert unconscious pressure and will throw up all kinds of images in the mind, and it will not be possible to maintain under these conditions the uninterrupted and tranquil state of the mind in which samadhi can be practiced. This state cannot be brought about by the mere exertion of willpower, as some people suppose. Wow. Sounds daunting, doesn't it? Well, every journey starts with one step. And what's the most important step of the journey? The one you're taking right now. It's the only step you ever take, is this step you're taking right now. If you read The Power of Now, you know that. There is no past, there is no future. There's only this moment in time. That's all that ever exists. We won't go into it. It'll explain it in the book. Time is not a timeline. There is no such thing as time. That's an invention. That's of the mind. The mind invents this. Time does not exist. But there is now. There is now. There is this moment. And the only step that is ever important is the one you're taking right now. How much progress can you make in one lifetime? As it turns out, it's probably far more than you would ever conceive of, but only if you make the effort. How much effort do you think Olympic athlete makes in order to win a gold medal? You think they just kind of practice whenever they feel like it, eat whatever they want?
They got a good trainer with the right kind of supplements.
Are you referring to Lance Armstrong? You don't achieve unless you make a strenuous effort. And these guys do that for a number of years. Well, we have to work even harder. We can't just work a few years. We've got to work several lifetimes. And not that hard, but even harder, because this is a 24-hour-a-day affair. It's not just once a week. It's not, a few minutes here and there. This is 24 hours a day. So, what is this meditation which actually is the method that brings us there? Meditation in the sutras, the entire process is referred to as samyama. Now, whether or not you memorize that word is not important, but it's called samyama. And it consists of 3 phases. And those 3 phases are dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Those 3 terms are most often translated by the writers of commentaries on the sutras as concentration, and then meditation, and then contemplation. To me, that is extremely confusing. And you'll find this time after time, and even Taimni uses those terms. And so does Alice Bailey. Contemplation, meditation, and then concentration, meditation, and then contemplation. And yet we refer to the entire process as meditation. So I propose, and this is just an idea, I propose that instead of those terms that we use concentration, contemplation, and samadhi. To me, that makes more sense in English terms. So what are we talking about? Concentration, most of us can do that. We can at least concentrate on something, focus the mind. So we can at least begin what we call meditation, and in many cases that's about all we can do. If we can do it for 15 minutes, that's pretty good. Some people can do it for 30 minutes. But concentrate on something. So that means there's still some kind of thought, but you're trying to control that thought. You're not just letting your mind wander. You're at least thinking about a particular thing. And then if you begin getting some insights where you are in tune with the whole situation, I call that contemplation. That's when you're actually somewhat elevated in consciousness and beginning to receive a little bit of insight from some higher plane. It's hard to say what plane you happen to be on, but at least you feel, you get the experience that there is some insight coming to you from a higher level, and that it gives you, in some cases, the solution to practical problems. I use this all the time, and Paul does too. In situations at work, if you've got an employee with a problem of some sort, or if you have a situation that is causing anxiety or a disruption, concentrating and contemplating this often gives you the result, and it all works out. Samadhi is a different thing. Once you reach the level of consciousness where samadhi happens, you are beginning at the higher mind. You are already in touch with the soul to some extent. When you read the science of yoga, you'll find that there are seven different levels of samadhi. And it begins at the higher realms of the mental plane. And it goes up to the Buddhic, the Atmic plane, and beyond. So your levels of samadhi continue to increase. I don't know at what level an adept has reached, but pretty high in this level of achieving samadhi. And by the way, most of their work is done during this state of samadhi, during a state of meditation. It's interesting to note that no one ever talks about HPB sitting in a state of meditation. Has anybody ever read that she said, I'm going to go meditate for an hour? I've never seen that anywhere. No. And in fact, an advanced yogi and an adept doesn't have to do like we do. They don't have to go through this process of trying to calm everything down. They can kind of run the gamut just simply by changing their focus. They can probably meditate with their eyes open. I can't do it yet, but I'm sure they can.
Well, remember Krishnamurti, he was a big proponent of that. Meditation is constantly, it's all the time. It's a combination of what you said, there's only now. So when will you meditate? That was his thing, and he always said meditation is now. Meditation is always in the moment at all times. Whatever you're doing, kind of the point you're making. These adepts or that, they're meditating all the time, but they've still got to cook and clean the house and all that, yet they're in a constant state of meditation, which is foreign to us. I like your point. We think you got to have your space and your incense and quiet and all that, and it's not where they're at, though.
Meditation is not an activity. It's
Nice.
a state of being. Please be clear about that. It's not an activity. It's not something you carve out 30 minutes here and you say, I'm going to go meditate. No, you are in a state of meditation at some point, and then all of this process occurs. When you are in the right state of mind, it automatically occurs. It's not like you have to go through, like John says, a particular series of events. No, if you were an adept, you could be sitting in the meridian in the highway and you could meditate. There would be no obstacle whatsoever to meditate. And HBB, I'm sure, was able to be in a meditative state pretty much whenever she wanted.
I'd like to bring up a point. I actually love this three-pronged idea of the process of meditation. When we're describing what meditation is to newcomers to Theosophy or to seasoned Theosophists who want to explore more about how to meditate properly or how to meditate at all, I like dissecting this down into three easy parts, because lots of people say, what really is meditation? And I know it can be used as a new age word. I'm going to go meditate. And some people in our Hatha yoga classes say it's a moving meditation. But what actually, and Tai Chi is a moving meditation. And I'm just going to go meditate for a while. And it's almost like a pop culture phrase. And when we dissect this and really look at what the science of meditation is, I love breaking it down into these 3 phases. It helps newcomers, I think, tremendously when you say the first stage is being able to focus your mind and concentrate. That is the first stage of meditation, and it's so easy to explain to someone that way, I think. So being able to concentrate on one thing and without letting the mind run wild, and then the next stage, which is, I'm just reiterating what you said, contemplation, which is focusing on a thing in a relatively meditative state, which is when we're accessing a different realm. We're not completely in the physical anymore, which is where we receive the solutions and the insights, and then true meditation, which we're referring to as samadhi. And I just think that's so important to kind of remember and just explain that to newcomers. It's a good way to introduce people to what meditation is.
So again, meditation is far more complicated and difficult than most people guess. And actually there's, let's see if I can find it real quickly here. He says, most people are not willing to put forth the effort that it takes, and yet they are disappointed when they don't see results. I want to kind of talk about the 2 requirements, besides the 3 qualifications that HPV talked about. There are 2 very specific requirements that are mentioned in the Yoga Sutras time after time. How are we on time?
We're good. It's only a little. It's not quite 8:50.
Almost 8:15?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. These 2 words are viveka and vairagya. How many of you know these terms?
We studied them.
All right.
Sandy, raise your hand.
All right. Viveka and vairagya. Let me find the one quote here.
Her husband's not old enough yet.
Viveka. Now, viveka is normally translated as, it used to be called discrimination, but that took on other meanings. So I prefer to use discernment. Discernment. To be able to discern. And in a sense, it's common sense. But not many people have common sense. It's really being able to see clearly without filters. That's the only time you can really be discerning. Otherwise, you're making judgments on things. This is a huge thing with Krishnamurti and with Eckhart Tolle. Non-judgment. Here's the 3 things that Eckhart Tolle emphasizes: non-judgment, non-reaction, and non-attachment. They're all nons. Non-reaction, non-attachment, and non-judgment. If you can achieve those 3 things, you're on the very threshold of becoming an adept. And this is really what is required in transforming yourself. And you make this transformation happen. In fact, you have to make the transformation happen before you gain any real level of meditation. People who claim that they are in deep meditation, unless it shows in their outer life, in their everyday activities, they're probably mistaken. They're probably not where they think they are. So viveka, this discernment, enables the aspirant to enter the path of yoga. Those who come to yoga out of curiosity drop out sooner or later, unable to bear its ceaseless strain and the ruthless stripping away of the personality. Whoa. Whoa. Those who come to yoga out of curiosity drop out sooner or later, unable to bear its ceaseless strain and the ruthless stripping away of the personality. Anybody feel your flesh being torn off your bone? Well, that's pretty much what happens. It is, remember, we have to eliminate the I consciousness. We have to get rid of the personality. And in Eckhart Tolle's terms, we have to get rid of the ego. Get rid of it completely. So when HPB says well, I guess it's actually in Light on the Path, kill out desire, but act as if you still had desire.
Very good, yeah.
Because it still is actually desire, but it's a higher form of desire. So the form of desire we're wanting to kill out is for personal need. My personal desires, my emotional desires. It's always emotional. If it's something personal, there's always an element of emotion attached to it. If you get beyond that, then you still have a desire, but it's no longer about you and your personal needs. Now it's about all humanity and about all of of it. Now you're an instrument of the universe. You have desire still, but it's not impulse, it's not enforced by your own personal needs. It's forced because you really want to be an instrument and to help. And there's nothing that stands in your way because you've released and overcome all of the obstacles, all of the fetters. I love that term, fetters. It's like a shackle, and it holds us back. These are the shackles that keep us from gaining altitude, from rising higher in consciousness. And until we do that, we're not much of an instrument. The hierarchy, those who have advanced, can't use us as instruments until we get rid of this personality, of the needs, at least the personal, emotional needs that this personality has. Let me see if I can find this real quick here.
Terry, I just reading Mabel Collins. She put it in a rather shocking way, but I mean, for the difficulty, she said, put your foot on the neck of personality and crush it and kill it before it cries out for mercy. Because if it granted mercy, it will come back to torment you. Very dramatic, very, I mean, to modern people's sensitivity, it's, I think, borders on the offensive. But I think she did, your point is, she's trying to make that point even stronger. She said, step on it and kill it. And before it cries out for mercy, which is the emotional tinge of it. And to think of it, many people have had to change. But when that point comes that you have to kill out that person that you have been for most of your life, it is probably the most difficult thing a person can even try to do. Because, okay, I don't want to be the person that I was, but who am I?
Exactly.
It's a tremendous difficult thing that you're asking of us. I mean, not you personally, but is asked of us. It's quite fearful, in reality.
Tiny says, aspirants who are not familiar with the realities of yogic life plunge directly into the practice of meditation without any preparation whatsoever, and then wonder why they do not make any progress. So, instead of, it doesn't hurt to sit down and practice concentration and to do what we call meditation. But please realize that there's a much longer process and a much more difficult process that for which this is just the preparation. And we've got a few lifetimes most likely before we reach that stage. Now, so viveka and vairagya. Vairagya is the other word that is used quite often in the Yoga Sutras. HPB, I think, described it best. She calls it the indifference to pleasure or pain. They're treated just the same. It also means non-reaction and non-judgment. I won't tell you the story of the Chinese farmer, but we all know similar stories. Something happens that seems to everyone else to be wonderful and good, and everyone says, oh, what good luck you have. Well, maybe not. And then something terrible happens. Oh, what terrible luck you have. Maybe not. And as it turns out, what seemed to be good ended up not being so good, and what they thought was bad ended up being quite good, and so it just went back and forth. The fact is, we can't see at this level. what is good and what is bad. In fact, everything is good because it is life experience. I don't care how bad it is. We had the tragedy of the shooting. It still is part of life experience. We think, oh, this shouldn't happen. Well, it does happen. It is part of life. And when it is seen from a much higher point of view, and when all events are seen from a higher point of view, it all fits in perfectly. There is nothing that is out of sync or out of line. We can't see it. I can't see it. But if I were an adept, I probably could. I could probably rise above and see the patterns. There's karma involved. There's definitely karma involved. We don't know what that is. And it's another reason not to judge. We don't know the circumstances. The masters point out many times in the Mahatma letters, you judge on appearances. You have nothing else on which to base a judgment. So you base on appearances, especially the Englishmen who everyone had to dress just so, and they had to act a certain way and speak a certain way, and it was appearances. I mean, the whole idea of My Fair Lady is based on, you take a gutter snipe, and if she acts a certain way, she'll be passed off as a society lady. And that's exactly, it was a spoof. He was making fun of the English idea that if you act a certain way, then you're in. You've passed the test. So the masters said, that's not how we look at things. We look at causes. We look at the karma. We look at it from a higher perspective. But we have the advantage that we're able to do that. But the point is, why would we judge if we can't see that? We're making judgments on something that we have no way of knowing the truth. So don't judge. Observe. There's nothing wrong with observing. Be very clear about the difference between being subjective and being objective. You know, I can say, look at Sandy. Look at that terrible outfit she's wearing. That's a judgment. You know, what's terrible or whatever. Don't worry, it's not terrible. If I look at her and I say, Sandy's wearing a black outfit with black trousers and with a roughly knitted over vest or something, that's subjective. No one can quibble about that. I'm just stating facts. I'm observing and then I'm stating something. But there's no judgment involved. And whenever there's judgment, there is an emotional or an ego. My ego is involved. I'm trying to assert my superiority by making a judgment. Oh, look at that. That would imply that I had better judgment than someone else, doesn't it? It seems like such a little thing, and yet it's not. This is the sort of thing that the masters talk about. Watching the little tiny things in your life and being extremely careful how you operate. Instead of talking all the time, simply observe. And don't make judgments, but just observe. Look at the color. Look how that combines with that. Look how this makes this color stand out more. That's how you learn, by observing and by being observant. The more you're expressing opinions, the less you're learning. So vairagya is the indifference to pleasure or pain. Equanimity. These are two things that we absolutely have to develop. And in fact, these are the first two qualifications mentioned in Jnana Yoga. Len Reader's book, The Masters in the Path, mentions these as the first two qualifications for discipleship, viveka and vairagya. So, to be able to discern, we have to be quiet, we have to observe without judgment, and expand our ability to see. And the quieter we are, the more we observe without judging, the more we are able to see clearly. Vairagya gives us a solid foundation and a balance in our lives. It keeps us perfectly balanced. Andrew does a lot of energy work, and that has to do with rebalancing energies that are out of sync. Something has thrown it off. Often it's an emotion that throws it off. And there are different methods of rebalancing that. The way you can do it for yourself is to work through that. And you have to, it is work. If you want to rebalance something in your life, first of all, figure out what is off balance. And then during your meditation, contemplation, use that as a tool. All right, I have a difficulty with this person in my relationship with this person. What's out of whack here? Don't think that you're going to change that person and that's going to rebalance things. What's out of balance is the fact that you're thrown off balance because they do something you don't like. No one can make you angry. Did you know that? No one can make you angry. But you can react in an angry fashion to someone. And a lot of times, they love that. Let's push that button. That was fun. Look at the fireworks that one caused.
Control.
And they have control. You just gave up control to that person, and then you get all upset. And what does that do? It throws your energy out of whack. And now you experience illnesses. When you don't react, nothing gets out of whack. When you are perfectly balanced, there's no need to go see Andrew anymore.
That's right, I don't see healthy people.
But he and all the other therapists will not be out of work for any time soon. There's plenty of work to go around. So we can work on ourselves by doing this. Viveka and Vairagya. Now, he says here, the weapons used in the last stage of casting off these fetters, he's talking about the very end when you're getting close to having achieved the end of human evolution. The weapons used in the last stage are the same as those used in the first stage. The yogi enters the path of yoga through Viveka and Vairagya, and he leaves this path through Viveka and Vairagya. That's how important these are. I hope everyone will remember at least these two Sanskrit words, Viveka and Vairagya. Because if you can do nothing more in this lifetime but develop those two abilities, you will have achieved an immense step towards the goal. Earlier I was saying, how much can you achieve in one lifetime? It is amazing when you really put the effort forward. It may actually be more than you expect. You may get much farther than you ever dreamed. He also talks about Viveka and Vairagya as a kind of virtuous circle. Instead of a vicious circle, it's a virtuous circle. He says they strengthen and reinforce each other and form a kind of virtuous circle which accelerates in an ever-increasing degree the progress of the yogi towards self-realization. You can't just use one or the other. That's why he said you can't do this piecemeal. You've got to be operating on many different levels. Yes, you can focus on one at a time, but don't take your eye off the ball. Don't lose your main focus, and realize that you're going to have to be balancing a lot of different things. You ever seen those guys that can spin 30 plates on poles, and as soon as one starts to wobble, they run over and get that? We kind of have to do the same thing. We have to be able to not take our eye off the whole field here. And when one thing starts to get out of whack, we need to get that back in alignment and not forget about the others at the same time. It's not an easy proposition, this yogic path. It's the path that HPV is talking about. If you want to become an adept, it's the same thing. That's why I say none of these spiritual teachers teach you anything different. It's the same message every single time, just in different words. So, let me read something that he wrote in his one of his other books, The Science of Occultism. KH mentions this in one of his letters. What time do we have?
It's 8:30.
Okay, let's do this, and then we'll have a few minutes of kind of more open discussion. KH mentions in one of his letters that all of this effort, and he emphasizes just how strenuous it is too, time after time. All of this effort at some point is rewarded 1,000-fold, he says. When you reach that stage, and he's talking about a stage of high samadhi, when you gain knowledge not by reading and not by studying, but by absorbing it at its own level, and you can simply tune into whatever it is you want to understand, and it comes into you. It just is absorbed into you. Sounds amazing, doesn't it? This is not a lot of books here. I went to the TS in Uruguay, and they were showing me this library. It's an enormous room. I said, how many books are here? And they said, well, we think there are around 5,000. I said, gosh. But if you read every one of those 5,000 books and even understood it to an adequate degree, you would not gain enlightenment. It would not come from understanding. You will never, ever gain enlightenment by reading or studying. It comes from experiencing. So what KH described, which is one of the goals and what makes an adept, is their ability to collect this understanding that we as normal humans are definitely not able to just yet. However, there is a state once in a while where this can occur on a temporary basis. Let's see what Tiny said in Science and Occultism. And this was in the preface to his book. He said, there is yet another method of gaining knowledge concerning the deeper realities of existence. This is through initiation. We've all heard about initiations, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about initiation. This to me is somebody who's speaking from experience. This is through initiation, when knowledge is imparted from one who knows and has the necessary power and authority to do so, to a qualified disciple by temporarily raising the receptivity of the latter by occult methods. Owing to this artificial sensitivity induced in this manner, the consciousness of the recipient is temporarily raised to a higher level and is able to perceive the particular truth as a direct experience in consciousness. Kind of like what KH was describing, but at a lower level. This kind of sensitivity does not, however, last, and is not under one's control, as it has been induced temporarily by an external agency, by the descent of particular kinds of forces in the vehicles by esoteric methods. But it generally sets in motion processes which culminate in the capacity to gain these realizations voluntarily and by one's own efforts. This is really the realm of yoga. Wow. Wow. Now, Eckhart Tolle talks about an experience he had when he was 29 years old and was suicidal, and everything was bleak and dark. He woke up one morning and he was not even the same person. Everything had changed overnight. He's describing exactly this same thing. Everything had, he could almost see the life force in everything. And he was stunned and amazed. He spent the next 2 years basically sitting on a park bench every day, just in amazement at the world and at life. And any trace of any despair or depression had long ago disappeared. But he also said that it diminished over time. Got lower and lower and lower. And finally, he had to kind of go back to work and figure out how to make a living, but he also, at that point, started teaching people spiritually, becoming a spiritual guru. Tim Boyd describes a very similar incident. Has anybody read that in the Quest magazine about 4 years ago? When he was young, and I think it was in his young, early 20s, I believe, or mid-20s, he was in a park in New York City. And he said between taking one step and the next step, he had a similar experience, just like that. His consciousness shifted entirely. And it's raised immensely in comparison to what it was a few minutes earlier. Although normally, I should say, this happens at night. And it is sometimes only at some point during the following day that that person becomes aware of the shift. Some have described it differently, but many people were aware immediately on waking up. Others, it happened at some point during the day, and it's just like, what in the world happened? I'm not the same person I was yesterday at all. I mean, none of us are, but I mean, this is like going from here to here, and it jumps just like that. But every single one describes that it diminishes. So what is it? Most people that have experienced that describe it as an act of grace. And it's just like Timely says, it's like someone touches you, and your vision is opened, your consciousness is raised, but because you haven't earned it, you haven't yet raised your consciousness yourself, it is an act of grace. It is like a gift. It's like, here's what you can develop if you put forth the effort. That's what initiation is.
It's the purpose of ritual, too.
But, and it is something that actually takes place. There is a being, a spiritual being, that causes this to happen. And it's only because you have done the preparatory work. If you haven't done the work, it isn't going to happen to you. And you can't be guaranteed, no one can be guaranteed that it will happen in any particular lifetime. You may have experienced it in a previous lifetime, and you will definitely experience it in a future lifetime. Whether or not it will occur in this one, no one knows. But be ready for it in case it does occur. The goal, when it does occur, is to maintain it as long as possible by making the effort, every effort you can, through meditation, etc., and your lifestyle. Your life, that's why I'm saying this is a 24-hour-a-day operation. This is not just here and there a few minutes. You've got to really be devoted to it if you're going to make this happen. And then try to keep it at a high level as long as possible. And you may go 20, 30 years, you may never get a second opening during that lifetime, but it will occur again. But you know, you've experienced it now. You know what it feels like, and now you get to work on getting yourself back up to that level on your own. That's the work ahead of you. That then becomes your normal, everyday field of operation. It's very strenuous. It doesn't happen with just a little bit of effort. It takes a lot of effort. All right. Gosh, we've covered a little bit of material. Hope I haven't overwhelmed anyone. Meditation is probably, you'll probably never think of meditation quite the same way that you used to in the past. I don't know, maybe you all knew this before. But does anyone have anything that they would like to flesh out a little bit more? Or, yes.
Well, as you were talking, I kept coming back to this thought that was presented to me, maybe even a decade ago. It is such a powerful thought. I've just never think about it a lot. And it was spoken by a yoga teacher to me, and she said, she told the class, this moment is perfect. If it was not, it would be otherwise. How would you weave that into non-judgment and detachment from good and bad?
Wow, very, very, very profound, very good. And this brings up something, when we're talking about getting rid of desires and getting rid of the ego, by practicing non-judgment, non-reaction, and non-attachment. This is exactly what it is. First, let me say that everything that exists in the world that we call evil or bad, we, as a human race, created ourselves. Every bit of it. Animals can't be evil. They run strictly by instinct. They don't have any free will, as we call it. Humans have free will. Animals just operate by instinct. So they don't create karma, for one thing. Let me mention, and I'm so glad you brought that up. On the higher mental plane, we are told that it is wide open. It's almost uninhabited by forms, well, they're not forms, but by thoughts, by vibrational images. Or there is almost nothing on the higher mental plane because very few humans have achieved that ability to create anything on it. The adepts have, some of their pupils have, but you could shoot a gun through that space and not hit anything. The astral plane is filled with crap. Filled with crap. I mean, there is not a spot anywhere on this emotional plane that we have not filled to capacity. And we still keep cramming more into it. It is horrid. If we were clairvoyant and could see the lower levels of the astral plane, it would be like a cesspool. And clairvoyants describe it as being something to avoid. I mean, these are the thoughts of anger and frustration, of revenge that people throw out there all the time, this emotional chaos that surrounds us at all times. But we humans did that. We did it. I mean, not you personally this lifetime, but over millions of years of the existence of the human kingdom on this planet, we